People want to say, well, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Well, that's the way it's always been. If you want to make your own economy, you make your own life, you make your own world.
Us being entrepreneurs, being in business, what that has proven to me is where we're at now. It's like, hey, there's going to be some ups and downs and roller coasters. What can we do to take control of our own? As you're suggesting this, as people are listening, how can you encourage them make their own economy?
It all goes back to personal responsibility. Complacency is killing our culture. No provision comes to you in life without having a commitment to driving your agenda forward for your benefit, your community, your family. But societally, we have shifted so far away from personal responsibility to where people think, well, everything's out of my control. It's a complacency, and it's like this default narrative that people fall into.
Before we jump into this episode, I'd love to invite you to be a part of the community where you can listen to more content to help you be a smarter, stronger, and better equipped, successful leader. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button. I would love and appreciate your support. It's amazing to me to watch the community grow and read all of your comments each and every week. I can't wait to go on the journey with you. Thank you so much, and it means the world to me. Welcome to the Impact Driven Leader podcast with your host, me, Tyler Dickerhoof. Today, I'm joined by a friend, Taylor Davis. Taylor and I met each other earlier this summer, and as we're recording this late in 2024. Taylor is the author of a book, Parable of the Republic. We'll get into that a little bit. He's also the founder of the IRONGUIDE Financial Advisory Team. He's a political commentator, which, I mean, that's kind of like going from one end of the spectrum to the next. He's been on national news agencies, and he's also a public speaker. He's a dad, former quarterback. He is a Kentucky native. You know, I would say, are you a colonial, or are you like at heart, are you a Wildcat? Like, what are you at heart? I know you're a Buckeye. I know you were born in Ohio as well. But like, if you like a team, there's school you went to, but the team that you would really get behind, what is it?
It would have to be Kentucky, unless Kentucky plays EKU. I've seen, the Colonels put up some good fights, got to be, a part of them. But day in and day out, I'm a, Kentucky basketball and football fan. Love the teams, grew up coming to the games with my dad and grandfather. And so I love Kentucky. I was born in the Buckeye State, but that is not for me. That's not my fan base, not my
Come
school.
on, man.
It's okay, but that's not me.
Right. All right. Well, I mean, here's the way to look at that as we're getting started. I cherish my Ohio roots. I've lived outside of the state longer than I lived there. I'm not a Buckeye by education, but so I can appreciate where you're saying. I appreciate the banter there. Let's first dive in. And let's set the stage right now. Here we are. We're, releasing this episode the end of 2024. We're recording this before the dubious election of 2024. It's afterward, right? We're listening to this. We're watching this. We're taking this all in. Where do we go next? As the U.S. economy, where we're at in the world, where do we go next?
It's going to be ugly. It's going to be a tumultuous time, but I think the people who are stoics, the people who aren't influenced by outside events and people, are the people who win in the long run. The people who don't get thrown off their path are the people who win in the long run.
So what key indicators do you feel are pointing to that? I didn't tell you. We don't know who's going to get elected. And I would agree with you. I don't think it really matters. I'm on the same page as you, but what key indicators are you seeing right now that as we're recording this prior to the election and we're talking about it, people are listening after the election, what key indicators are you seeing now that people should really take note of as this releases the end of the year?
Well, the biggest indicator is history. I'm a big believer that past is prologue, and things aren't all that different. What we're living here in the present is in a sensationalized culture. Something that's somewhat bad is then painted as being absolutely awful, and something that's mildly helpful is painted as being like the greatest thing ever. We've become so sensationalized, and I think that's what people get caught up in. That's what throws them off their focus from having their feet on the ground and multiplying their talents where they are. They get caught up in outcomes that they couldn't possibly control. I always say, control what you can control and leave the rest to God. If you operate in that model, you don't get depressed if your candidate loses. You don't get overly boisterous if your candidate wins. You stay true to yourself.
It's funny. My wife, us being entrepreneurs, being in business, ourselves much the last 20 some years, having gone through 08, 09, and I know that was just a early stage in your life, but that's okay. And what that has proven to me is where we're at now. It's like, hey, there's going to be some ups and downs and roller coasters. What can we do to take control of our own? And so, as you're suggesting this, as people are listening, how can you, encourage them to, I guess, in my wife's words, and share this, make their own economy?
It all goes back to personal responsibility. There's this vibe in our modern culture where, well, people want to say, well, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Like, well, that's the way it's always been. And if you subscribe to just saying, well, I'm stuck in my station in life, then if you think that way, it's, for certain to manifest in the future. I think if you want to make your own economy, you make your own life, you make your own world. And one of the best things I was ever taught by a great mentor named John Wright Sr. was words create worlds. The words that you speak in your own everyday life create your worldview. And so I consistently have to manipulate my own worldview because I get influenced like everybody else. You open your phone, you turn on the television, you immediately get influenced. And one of the ways that I think that everybody can kind of veer from that and recenter themselves into their building their own economy is focusing on what they can control and leaning on their own, individual spirit to go drive that moving forward and get that thing moving forward instead of sitting still saying, oh, well, I'm just, tossed in the waves. You're not tossed in the waves. Everybody is capable of trimming the sails and getting moving again.
So let me kind of just postulate on this one. Have we gotten there because of the history the last 20, 30, 40 years? Is there a generational mindset difference where we've kind of, if you look at a lot of the banter politically in the world, it's like, hey, we have to take from those that just are greedy and take advantage of the system and give to those that are disparaged. That's the commentary that I constantly hear. What I think you and I both believe is, no, that's a mindset. That is the words that you're using to create the world. Why do you think that's taken such a strong hold in so many of our modern day workers, our modern day, people that are part of this country that are doing the work every day? Why do you think that's perpetuated their mindset?
Because complacency is killing us.
Where's
There's
it
a
coming
com-
from?
It's come from a what I would call a societal shift. If you look at America's history, we're not just thinkers, we're dreamers and we're doers, but we veered off from that. The idea that that somebody's going to have your back is just not true. The government's not always going to come in and have your back. The big company's not always going to come in and have your back. One of the values that I put among the highest of the many is personal liberty, but you don't get personal liberty without having responsibility. And no provision comes to you in life without having a commitment to driving your agenda forward for your benefit, your community, your family. But societally, we have shifted so far away from personal responsibility to where people think, well, everything's out of my control. It's just it's a complacency, and it's like this default narrative that people fall into. Everybody that I coach, that I talk to, that I advise, I'm always talking about controlling what they can control and taking action on that. But it's this mindset that has overtaken our country, and ultimately complacency kills. Complacency kills marriages. If you don't work on your marriage, if you're not intentional about your marriage, it will die. If you're complacent about your influence on your kids, that relationship will be damaged and beyond repair. If you're complacent about your faith, you will drift away, and until you're at rock bottom. Complacency is killing our culture.
I'm trying to process and think about this as you're saying it. And as a parent of three high schoolers, a senior, sophomore, and a freshman, and what they're going through, right? A new adult 18-year-old daughter now, and I know your son is just over one. So I mean, totally different spectrums. But one thing that I recognize and see in a lot of ways that have, and I want to frame this in so I get your perspective as an athlete, as a student athlete, both in college, but also, high school and before that. How much do you think that your years of playing competitive sports drove complacency to be a part of your world, or it drove it away? So in comparison, did you see that, hey, everyone gets to play? It's equal playing time at, maybe sub varsity, but varsity, man, you're fighting for every moment. There's a hierarchy. This is what you got to achieve. Personally, do you think that experience and then collegiately drove you to understand that better, or just kind of muted it?
I think that sports are so important, truly competitive sports. It's the same
Okay,
thing in
it's a
business.
great qualifier.
Yeah, truly competitive sports, the best players will play. But one of the best things that ever happened to me was when politics got involved in sports and the best players weren't playing because there was influence. You think that's bad, that's an awful thing, that should never happen. I'm grateful that it happened because it prepared me for the business and political world where we don't necessarily have the meritocracy that we once had. And kind of going back to what we were talking about before,
Yeah.
veering away from what we would call the American way, where people have drifted into complacency, we've lost a sense of meritocracy in our culture. And I had great coaches, coming up. I had a great dad, a great grandfather who made me competitive, who taught me that complacency kills in sports. It's not just what you do, on the practice field; it's what you do at night after you go home. It's what you do in the morning before school. That's the difference maker. But I would say that when you're in scenarios where complacency or a political influence is affecting sports, that's preparing you for life because there will be times in your life where somebody gets that promotion that's not based on meritocracy. And you have to be prepared to say, okay, I can't control that outcome. I can only control on how much I get better. And the way you defeat those situations is when you become so astronomically better that people can't, is no longer a toss up. It's got to be a landslide difference in skill, ability, focus, determination, and discipline to where you just run up the score to where that can't happen. I think that was one of the best experiences for me. I hated it when I was going through it, but looking back as an adult, it was one of the best experiences that prepared me for adulthood.
So, I mean, I really want to dig into the story now. I mean, you can give in detail whichever you want, or gloss over. You don't want to name names. Hey, that's fine. But I want to know in the moment what was going through Taylor's head. Like, how did you digest that in the moment?
Yeah. So I'm sitting in a quarterback meeting room, and everybody thinks on the team that I'm going to be named the starter. And we're going through fall camp and getting ready.
Just play with me here. I have a son who's a quarterback.
Yeah.
My older son's best friend is a quarterback. So I kind of understand the ways that teammates may show that they know who's the better player. They really do, right? So what were some of those examples they were sharing with you that was identified? Just play with me here
So I was a freshman, and I felt like I won the respect of my teammates because I wasn't afraid to get hit. I'd step up in the pocket, take a hit, still complete the pass, and get up ready to go, not laying on the ground and showing how hurt I am and whatever else. But when you win that camaraderie of your team, you can tell when you're getting those reps in practice that things move a little bit better when you're at the helm. When you're the signal caller, when you're the field general, things move a little bit better. And then you're sitting in a meeting room, and you have a coach tell you, "Hey, this is what we're going to do. You're not going to be our guy starting out." When in reality, what you know is going on behind the scenes, or what I knew was going on behind the scenes, and what my teammates knew what was going on behind the scenes, was that another guy, who's a great guy, is a great friend of mine, but he had a parent and or grandparents who were boosters to the university, and that played an effect. And I remember calling my parents, and I was crushed. And my dad said, "Give it about 2 to 3 games." after people start to get frustrated about the ball not moving down the field, not putting points up on the board, not getting people on their feet, eventually it'll become unmistakable and they'll have to make a change. And I've seen this carried out time and time again in professional sports, college sports, high school sports. That happens, but again, you can't control what that coach chooses. He's the coach. They're paid a lot of money to make those decisions, and sometimes they get paid a lot of money to make bad decisions.
Or
And
they get paid a lot of money and
they
they're forced into certain decisions.
they get big buyouts to go
Yeah.
away. It just happens.
Yeah.
And so I'll give you an example, real world.
Yeah.
A very good friend of mine, it's kind of the same situation, which, I heard Ed Milet say one time, you're most qualified to help the person you used to be. And a very good friend of mine, hunting buddy of mine, is named John Paddock. And he's younger than me. He just got done playing quarterback at the University of Illinois. And I remember, finding out, he's a senior, he's just leader of the team, found out he wasn't starting. I read it on an ESPN notification, Illinois names a starter. I picked up the phone and I called John and I said, hey, I know exactly what's going through your head. And his grandfather, John Wright Sr., is the coach I was mentioning, so that's how we met.
Okay.
But I called him and I said, I know exactly what you're going through. If you've got 10 minutes, I can help you feel better by the end of this call. And guess what happened?
So what'd you tell him?
I told him, you can't control what that coach chose. But if you're truly the guy, it will be revealed, in the way that the game plays out. And eventually they'll have to put you in because it will be so unmistakable that they've made a bad choice. And a lot of times coaches who, they want to double down on their bad choice because they're just so loyal, to their own ignorance, they'll keep it. I told him exactly what my dad told me. I said, buddy, I've been there. And you just watch, give it a couple games, let a little pain set in that they made a bad decision. When it becomes so unmistakable, you'll go in. He ends up going in, getting in. He becomes a starter, ends up throwing a massive game-winning touchdown pass. Illinois, he's going to be, carved in bronze one day, I think, in Illinois, the University of Illinois. But that was so special for me because I thought maybe God put me through that so I could help him.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that is something that I believe is, as we're kind of collecting thoughts here and moving down. And I love the fact that you share that perspective, those lessons that you learned then, but you had to learn that lesson. Had, for example, there was a meritocracy, there's a situation right now, seeing a team that I watch and the quarterbacks, completely different ability to move the team, move the ball, to follow the merits of the game, and they're given equal playtime. And as I listen the lesson from you, and as I try to encourage one of those quarterbacks, I'm like, keep doing the right thing. Keep looking for ways to get better because they're showing there's no meritocracy. It is just socialistic. You each get the same. One scores points for their team, the other one scores points for the other team. That is the trend. That's what happens every game, and yet they're both given the same. And when I look at those situations, that is happening in our society. And you said something that to me is so powerful that if a leader's listening to this, if someone's involved in, youth athletics or whatever, man, make them work for it. Because it will show up 10, 12, 15 years down the road, and it will be the greatest thing ever for
That's
them
right.
and anyone else.
Because when they face it in adulthood, they'll go, oh, I've been here before.
Yeah.
I've felt this emotion before. I've been through this disappointment before. So, this is just, I'm ready to go. I've already been through this.
I think what's hard here is we're rectifying this in real time that's showing up on an economic, national, political level of how do we parent this generation of individuals and just say the millennials, right? It's your generation. It's the generation of how have we served them? Did they just get trophies or did they have to fight and face some adversity? And now we're kind of facing that as a society of saying, oh, well, they just gave it to me. I didn't have to, as you said, dig down, deal with the tough part, go look for, a mentorship and say, just keep working. Be so good.
Yeah. If you're good, they'll find you. You can't mask the fact that if you don't have the skills and the merits, it's not going to turn out so good. And I was talking to a college class not too long ago, and they were talking about how tough it is to find jobs. And I kind of went back and forth and said, well, what's tough about it? Well, it's just nobody's hiring and all this sort of stuff. And I polled the room, and I said, by a show of hands, of the 60 people here, how many of you are working through school, and how many of you are going to walk across the graduation stage with the only thing on your resume is a bachelor's degree that everybody has? Four were working through school.
4 of the 60.
4 of the 60 were working or doing internships through school, and these are juniors. The rest of them were just going to school. And I remember thinking, I don't know what you do with your time all day. If you're taking 15 or 18 hours, what do you do with the rest of your time? You're certainly not studying. It's not, it's not that hard. You got to be getting some experience doing something else. And so and when I was going through that conversation, I thought, okay, this isn't like, I don't feel called to just dump on them and say, you're lazy, you've had everything handed to you. So I just had this thought of, well, maybe I can story sell them on what I did and what some of my peers did, and maybe they'll go, oh, I want to align with that rather than the guy or gal next to me. And so I talked about being in school when I got done playing football. I worked at the Meyer Pharmacy. I worked on 2 political campaigns. Every relationship that I made there outside of the classroom was what was the launching pad for my career after school. And so I was able to step out of that classroom and get some real world experience, which then made me far more attractive when I was trying to build my business and grow.
One thing, as a quarterback, you probably had a unique skill set of talents. The talents that either let you play the position, helped you excel in whichever way you did, but you also had limitations, right? Every, great quarterback, everyone does. Were you, in your mindset, did you find yourself, I'm going to maximize my talents, or I'm trying to become what I'm not? How did you manage through that?
Well, when I was coming up in high school, that was like Tim Tebow days. So every quarterback and every quarterback coach wanted you to be a runner. And I'm like, that ain't me, y'all. Like I can sling it,
Say, hey, there's this
and
guy
I
Peyton
can
Manning
identify
and
the
Tom Brady.
yeah.
Like, they're pretty
Yeah,
good.
no, forgotten. It was like Tebow, RG3, Johnny
Okay.
Manziel, and so that was like the thing. And I just remember thinking, like, I'm not going to try to be somebody that I'm not. If that's what they're looking for, then I'm just not their guy. But I knew I would play to my advantages, not my disadvantages. And so my advantages were I could sling it. I was pretty accurate, but I could recognize patterns. I use that in business today, recognizing patterns, recognizing mismatches to your advantage, and then ceasing on that.
How much, as I bring that up, or maybe you're thinking about it right now, or maybe you've thought about it in your past, applies to your book, The Parable of Talents?
I would say they're directly aligned. The part of the book is about being introspective and really honing in on what gifts God has given you, and realizing, based on scripture, the way Jesus taught the disciples, you are called to multiply them, not bury them. And I make the analogy that we sit around a lot of times going, I wish somebody good would run for president. I don't like our choices. I wish somebody would do something. Well, the person you're looking for happens to be in the mirror every time you wake up in the morning. And until we have that sort of personal responsibility, nothing will change on a macro level. Until we have these small micro changes with individuals taking individual personal responsibility, will we never really see a national or regional prosperity. And so I made that analogy as well, as we talk about, oh, our American culture is being taken from us, things are getting so bad. Well, he who buries his talent will have it taken from him. And for far too long, far too many good people have been sitting on the sidelines. And when we were there in August, I thought one of the most powerful things that John said was when he's talking about being the salt, being the salt of the earth. And my pre-performance ritual before any meeting, before I joined with you today, before I join any big meeting, before I give a speech, is a very simple prayer. So it is very simple, and it's Heavenly Father, speak through me, write through me, because I don't have the wisdom or cleverness to do it on my own. And I would pray that prayer every night before I would start writing Parable for the Republic. And there's an analogy that I wrote the book. I hate the editing process, by the way. I don't like that. You got an editor that comes back and goes, "This is a great story. Can you expand on it?" I'm like, "Sure, whatever. We'll expand on it. I'll add more details about the weather that day or whatever you want." But I remember reading the book from cover to cover once they sent me the physical copy. And we were sitting in bed, and I looked over at my wife and I said, I don't know what this is, but there are parts of this book that I don't remember writing. I have no recollection of writing." And she goes, "Well, remember, you would completely yield yourself to the Holy Spirit every time that you would write." And one of those most powerful analogies that was in that book that was written through me. I didn't have the cleverness to write it, but it was written through me, and it was that when we're called to be the salt of the earth, the salt in that parable or analogy was salt in those times was used to preserve. It was used to add flavor. And you cannot be the salt of the earth if you're sitting on the shelf. And far too many people who could be the salt of the earth in our churches, in our businesses, in our political movements are sitting on the shelf as spectators. And I think that's an assessment of times that I think is important.
Just in my conversations, you mentioned John Maxwell, in the event that we were at together in August, and one thing that I've learned from him, and this is a challenge in our world, is so many leaders face the headwinds of being able to make an impact because of just the opposition, right? And the point that you're bringing there, and I think where we're going through, and especially in such a different, we're changing landscape, right? We've gone one way, and we've said at times is the pendulum. Well, the financial pendulum, the societal pendulum, the people that are starting to say, "Hey, wait a second, I don't like how this is turning out." I was sharing with Alex, my producer, just the other day, is that I'm starting to sense that there's people that are pushing back and say, "Hey, you promised the world to us, and it isn't turning out that way." We have Portland, which is now in a massive political changeover because they went to one extreme and they're like, "This isn't working. This isn't safe." And one thing that I see there is it's creating a fertile ground for people to stand up and say, "Hey, I'm not going to be the far one or the far left. It doesn't matter. But I'm going to be this because that's what I feel driven and called to be. And if that works for you, great. And if not, that's okay too." Is that just me as I'm sitting here thinking about it? Or do you sense that too as you're political commentating, as you're, financial advising, as you're advising, as you're speaking? Do you sense that too?
I sense that there is an awakening happening amongst people who are saying, "Wait a minute, this is not who we are. We have veered off course, and maybe I'm responsible for being a part of the solution." When times are good, nobody really thinks that way. They just think, "Well, we're coasting, things are going good," and then one day you just get sucker punched, and you find out what you really care about, and you decide, "Am I going to get back up off the mat? Am I going to start swinging? Or am I going to just lay here and bleed and hope somebody comes and saves me?" Nobody's coming to save us. It's upon us, we the people, the individual people, working together as this pendulum swings, whichever way. It's upon us to take that action and do it. And the very first thing, the very first emotion that I've identified that I have felt in those times where I feel called to speak out is you naturally feel fear and anxiety. You naturally feel, well, what will people think of me? What will happen if I'm combative? What will happen if I'm righteously and respectfully confrontational? What could happen? Well, I always go back to the good book. I was talking not too long ago on at another event where somebody asked me, well, how do you deal with some of the pushback that you get? Because when you write a book like I did, you get some nasty folks in the DMs, and that's fine. You get people who comment nasty things. That's just part of it. But I think we have to manage our expectations, because if your conviction is strong enough, you'll walk through fire. But we have to manage that expectation. If this is my belief and this is my calling, I'm going to fight through it no matter what faces me, because I'm staying true to myself, true to my beliefs, and true to my convictions. And the way you set that expectation is, I was talking about how, we sing in worship services about being the hands and feet of Jesus. And then we expect to walk out in life and expect life to just be this cakewalk and everything to be so nice. When in reality, the hands and feet of Jesus that we're singing about being had nails driven through them. It's not an easy walk. We were never promised an easy walk. When you take a righteous path, people are going to throw stones. There's going to be obstacles in the way. But if the purpose is stronger than the object that you're facing, you can overcome it, and you will. And so I think the more we live that way in our society, the better we'll be.
So you talk about that, the imagery, right? The pain, the challenge, the frustration. What signals have you gotten by your own actions, whether it's even, maybe sometimes advising clients, through how to manage their finances and helping them, maybe stuff they've shared with you or stuff that you've experienced, that it's like, okay, you're doing the right thing, you're on the right path? Because it sometimes happens with clouds, as you're mentioning, but what are those things that you sense, the signals that, all right, when we do this, we're on the right path?
When you know that, talk a little bit about this in the book. I go through an unlived experience in the book where I take the reader through. Imagine you just died and you've arrived to heaven. And the password to heaven is grace. It's not, here's my works and here's all the good deeds I did. The password is grace. But just for the sake of taking a reader through this, I asked the question, if you met Jesus today, and he said, what have you done with the talents I've given you? Which will be filthy rags in reality to, compared to our belief and the grace that we receive. But what would that be? What would that be of the people you've impacted, the causes you've fought for? And could you stand on what you've done and what you're doing with your actions in everyday life? And I think the true litmus test of that is being able to say, is this something that I would feel comfortable presenting to the source of all good things, to God? And if I'm not doing that in a way, if I'm not staying true to that, then you start realizing you're cheapening your calling or your virtue or your agenda or whatever you're led to do.
So if I just had a couple, words to describe what you just said there is and understand what we've said earlier, it's be willing to take risk rather than be complacent.
That's right.
There's an element of whether it is, making smart financial risks, making smart risks in either job, or maybe it's making smart risks into, taking a risk, because the greatest risk is not taking one at all.
Correct.
Yeah.
So here's the way that I communicate that with investors, with people I mentor, when I'm speaking to different crowds, whatever it may be, is what is risk? Risk, by definition, is the probability of a permanent loss of capital. If you bury it, it will be taken from you. If you seek to multiply it, you will be given more. When the master came back to the servants in that parable, he didn't say, "Oh, you risked it. You put it out there. It says in the scripture that they traded with them." The master didn't come out and go, "You could have lost everything. It could have went to zero. You could have lost in a trade." He said, he who buries his talent will have it taken from him. And so the lesson there is the real risk lies in complacency. The real risk lies in appeasing your inner emotions instead of focusing on the source of the talent you've been given.
All right, so let me discern this as a young father, young married, in your, almost 30s. What advice do you give to those counterparts of yours to set yourself up to say, hey, all the things we've talked about, I'm not going to fall into complacency, but yet I still need to respect my wife and my son, and what things are you going through there, or what are you doing to advise people, your friends that are your age, to say, hey, you can make it through this time where maybe housing costs are higher per relative, salary than ever before, but maybe these are the things you're going to have to do that I didn't have to necessarily do at 45.
The advice there is when you have a congruent set of expectations and you have a cause that you're going for or a goal that you're going for, unless there's a collective buy-in within that family unit, it's not possible because we all know people where there's two spouses who basically live different lives because they don't align on the purpose. The one spouse is kind of checked out, the other one's all in on this vision, but they're good at selling the vision to strangers, but not their own spouse.
Yeah.
And so, unless you can really define the principles and values within that household, do you really find the comfort in taking that risk of going out there and starting that business, buying that investment property, starting that investment account, writing that book, whatever it may be? And so I think that there's a level of strength that comes from having that cohesive purpose and unit, but that also comes into play when it's time to say no to some things.
Okay.
So, my wife is always there to check me when I'm like, hey, there's this, I got this request to do this show or whatever it is. And it's, during bath time with our son, which I do not miss. That's like we're playing Prince and Elvis and he's having a great time. There's nothing I can say on television that's more impactful than being there with him at that time. And so we have that balance there where she's able to help me get through those things. Sometimes when I go, it's okay to say no to something to keep you from getting the priorities out of order.
So, it's you're speaking here, and I would say mostly speaking to your peers, right? People that are listening, or even people my age that are, employing people, are partners with people that are a little bit younger than yourself. What can you best give as far as decisions about how to financially navigate the situations we're in? You talk about that, have the family unit, make sure we're on the same page, but is it, hey, be willing to work the second job? Go find ways to, maximize your talent, or is it like just those are thoughts just that pop to me, but man, what are you seeing people are doing that are providing that great opportunity that are allowing them to get through this more of a financial crunch?
My advice to them is that, again, the greatest risk lies in complacency. And you've got to put yourself out there in order for, opportunities to happen. One of the greatest it's like a cartoon, but Phil Stutz, he's Jonah Hill's psychiatrist. There's a great show on Netflix about it. And he's got the tools, all these little stick figure tools. And one of my favorite ones is the pillar of pain. We're here in a small world, and then here's this pillar of pain, but on the other side is endless possibilities. And most people get up to that pillar of pain and they turn right around and go back to living in the small world instead of going through the pain to get to the endless possibilities. And I'm a firm believer that everything you really want, everything you're called to do, is on the other side of some sort of fear or anxiety, which is a painful experience. But once you get to the other side, you find freedom. You find endless abundance to do that. And so when I'm encouraging people, I'm always talking to them about, you're not going to live forever. Tomorrow's not even promised. You've got to take action because on the other side of that pain is endless possibilities. There was plenty of times I got halfway through writing Parable for the Republic and I thought, why am I doing this? I'm writing, I'm up all night, I'm doing all sort of stuff, but I would always go back to, if I don't do it 10 years from now, I'm going to be going, well, how many people are not impacted today because I didn't write it, because I didn't take the risk, because I wasn't disciplined to the path. And I think when you help people visualize that, it's that futuristic view, they realize that they're letting their current self down. Or by shortchanging their current self, they're letting their future self down. And the more you can align your current self with your future self, the better that transition goes through that pain.
The biggest thing that I hear, and there's probably been a shift over the last 15 years, is just go all in. Don't worry about, hey, am I making the right, S&P, the right, Dow, the right whatever investment. It's like, hey, drive revenue, drive what I can do and help cover costs. And then once that gets to a point, then you start making those logical decisions. But trying to make those investment decisions and you're not maximizing your opportunity as far as to maximize your talent, right? To drive revenue, whatever that may be, start the business, to write the book, to, go find that new career, put yourself out there. Man, that's what I hear from you is to go and do.
I was in a training session when I first
Yeah.
started in the investment world, and the guy talking said, if you keep 2 meetings a day with prospects, 10 years from now, you'll have a self sustaining business. And I thought, well, I'm not going to wait till I'm 32 to have a self-sustaining business. I want to travel and live life and,
Yeah.
do great things for my wife. We want to have children. Like, I want to live an abundant life. I don't want to live a, just plug away type life where I can never do the extras, or do the special things. And so I remember sitting there going, okay, I don't like that. That whole mindset does not fit with me. And so I thought, okay, what if I do 10 meetings a day? What if I get in front of 10 people a day, in person, over Zoom, phone call, whatever? What if I'm in front of 10 a day instead of two? Well, then I can drastically shorten that time span, and I can live in the future much faster in the present. And when you run with that motor, it is so much fun. I love talking to people about getting to the flow state when you're just barely qualified for the challenge you're facing. You're not running up the score because then you get bored. You're not working with like little easy stuff because then you're just like you don't have any purpose for that. When you're in flow state, it is like running through a dream. It is the most ideal way to live. And then we've built a business and a lifestyle that curates flow state. And when you live that way, I remember some of my happiest times in business was working 100 hours a week, working Saturdays, because I was just getting good at my craft. I wasn't winning every relationship, I wasn't winning every transaction, but I was having so much fun just being in the thick of it, being in the fight of it, being in that momentum. But most people never get to feel that because they're trying to like micromanage and make everything perfect. The overwhelming advice is go all in and immerse yourself in that craft. You'll wake up one day and you'll go, well, I've got far more than I know what to do with. So now I can be very intentional with the little strategic things that I do.
That is something that, as I think back at times and the experiences that I've had in my wife and our businesses that we've done. And I think the great challenge is understanding that isn't a one and done. Sometimes you might need to redo that, and that's good and that's healthy. And it's being willing to do the work again. And maybe it's a different way. Maybe it's exercising different talents. I think one of the great opportunities that I have in the age that I'm at is to come along people like yourself or others and say, hey, it can be done. The shortcut is don't make the same mistakes like you were talking about, John Wright Sr. and how he, guides and mentors and coaches you. I think that is the greatest opportunity that we all get to have. And I think what I pick up, and again, it's relearning again, is to just go all in because you will never regret if you get buy-in from everyone. You're not doing it to chase status. You're not doing it to chase fame. You're doing it to do with those that you love and around you, your family. Man, go all in. And there's times that when my wife and I have done that, man, we've been rewarded. And I think right now is again the season to do that. That's what I'm hearing big and away from you, from a political, from an economic, from where we're at in just the current environment. That's what you read and see.
Yeah, your 2025, 2026 version of yourself will be greatly appreciative of your present self if you go all in now. And when you were talking, I had this memory that popped up. It comes up every once in a while. I'm a nostalgic person, but I remember when John Wright Sr. started coaching me, and I remember when we first met. He said, "You have among the best talent for speaking and influence and just the way you communicate things that I've ever seen, but you're not among the best in our industry. So there's something wrong with you. There's something inside of you that's unexpressed." And so we uncovered through his coaching that I struggled a lot with anger and anxiety. And I shared with him that my grandfather had passed away from a very violent form of cancer, and I was just carrying this anger around with me. And I remember him talking to me and saying, every day you bury your talent because you're stewing over this anger. You're just sitting there in your anger. The devil laughs at you. And that made me so mad. He knows I'm a competitive guy. That made me so mad that I said, I'm going to go run up the score because he won't laugh at me again. The devil will never laugh at me again for being a talent barrier. And I remember this is what made me think of that. I remember about 6 months later, John had told me, you need to hire people. You need to quit, being profitable in the short term. You need to scale or you're never going to be big. And 6 months in, I'm on a conference call with him, my wife, and two or three of our employees, just talking about the end of the year. And we were having a Christmas dinner that night. And I said, call in, talk to the team. And we were going through our numbers for, so far in that year and where we were trending in the next year. And I remember he stopped and he said, I want you all to just kind of take a mental picture of what life is like right now, because I don't know if you realize it because you've been so immersed in your craft the way I've coached you to, living in the flow state and really doubling down and going all in. I don't think you realize, based on what you've shared with me, you're now in the top 0.1% of this industry and nobody knows it. This is a special time. Remember, one day you'll think back on the days when you were so immersed in it and you're ranking so high and doing so well that nobody knew it as this little secret. And then one day it's going to be in a magazine, it's going to be in a paper, it's going to be in some Forbes thing, it's going to be on social media, it's going to be on television, whatever it is. But right now it's this really cool little thing that only these people know about. Nobody knows what's been created yet. And now that then motivated me to go even further all in to really expand and be all we could be. And it was a special time.
Man, I love that. Taylor, as we wrap up, one final question, and for someone listening in, maybe they're, financially overwhelmed, the election maybe didn't go the way they had hoped it would. What's something that you can do to encourage them to, what's the next step for them to take after they get done listening to this? What would you encourage them to do?
I would encourage them to lead themselves, lead their lives, lead their families, lead their businesses from their knees. One of the mistakes I made earlier in my career is I thought it was on me to make stuff happen. And I was performing for an audience because I got caught up in, hey, you're in the top 0.1%, you're ranking here and you're doing this. And when you do that and you're in a time of struggle, you start focusing on, well, where do I fit? How do I rank? Where am I at? Is my neighbor better off than me? Is my friend better off than me? And one of the things that I have learned when you're in that rut, and I'm speaking to somebody who's listening right now who's in a rut and you're frustrated, is remember that you perform for an audience of one. I perform for an audience of one, and his name is Jesus. And every day that I go out, I'm trying to perform in my business. I'm trying to perform and talking to people about my book when I'm giving a speech. I'm not doing it to impress other people, because you get caught up in that, you get caught up in the comparison game, and you're never going to win. There's always somebody better, more handsome, wealthier, whatever it may be, well-traveled. There's always going to be somebody. You cannot get caught up in that comparison game. You have to recenter on focusing on what you can control and who you really perform for. And the thing, a lot that we talk about leading other people, but really in order to lead other people, you got to lead yourself. You got to lead your thoughts, your actions, your beliefs, your habits. And if you can't control, your mental thought patterns and your self-talk, you're just going to become a victim to whatever station your brain is on. It's on Instagram station, it's on Fox News station, it's on MSNBC station. You're just taking in all this stuff. You've totally lost control of your mental direction. So recenter on who you are, lead yourself, and realize that you perform for an audience of one.
Man, I love it. Taylor, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everyone that's watching. Make sure if you're watching on YouTube to hit the subscribe button, the bell, so that way you get notified for each new episode, podcast episode each week, the other content that we release. As well, if you're listening on Apple, iTunes, or Spotify, make sure you rate and review each episode. If you could do that, I would appreciate it. So that way more listeners could find impactful leaders like Taylor. One other thing, put this in your notes. May 7th and 8th, Impact Driven Leader Summit, Spokane, Washington. Tickets are now available. You can claim your seat. Go to impactdrivenleadersummit.com. Would love to see you there as well. Thanks for being here. Until next time, choose to lead with impact.